are you still holding on to something that's clearly over? I'm not talking about a path where there's still potential and hope. I'm referring to things that have ended. Door locked, key thrown away. But you're still ruminating, playing it on loop, holding on to the idea of what life would have been like if only things had gone differently. But they didn't. And after a certain point, you just have to get over it. There are times when we go through really, really difficult things, and we don't always get an explanation of why. And even if we do, oftentimes, it's not good enough. We don't get sufficient closure, it just ends. Dwelling on a memory feels like you're keeping it alive, but really, it's the thing that's keeping you trapped. You probably don't want a different reality because you like the one that you had. But obsessing over a life that doesn't belong to you anymore keeps you stagnant and prevents you from growing from your experience. So why would you continue holding on to something that's proven it ain't happening? There's a real attachment to the way that we present and identify. And if some significant part of how we see ourselves ceases to exist, it's normal to question, well, if I'm not known as this person or someone who's in that role, what am I even doing? What purpose am I serving? You had a title, a calling, something you were good at, but now that it's gone, you don't know how to define yourself. Where does your former self end and your new one begin? You don't know, and if you're being honest, it makes you feel insecure. So you keep gripping onto your former identity because that person was confident and they knew who they were. And focusing on that memory is much easier than developing new ones. Another reason you might be holding on is because you know figuring out who you are now takes time and patience. It's slow, it's inconsistent, and frankly, you don't feel like being sad and rebuilding at the same time. Plus, it's scary. Who are you without this thing or person in your life? And what if you don't like what you see? So you avoid it altogether. On a more superficial, but still real note, not being seen as who you formerly were can be a blow to the ego. That can mean less attention, fewer perks, less respect. Not to mention the fear of being considered irrelevant. In this instance, you're not only grieving who you were, but how chosen you felt. That's hard to walk away from. You might not want to walk away because of all the time, energy, and resources you invested. Time that will never be recouped. Money spent. Rewarding moments. Emotional anguish. Literal blood, sweat, and tears. When you invest in something and it doesn't pan out the way you hoped, that's a tough pill to swallow because then it feels as if it was all for nothing. However, something that is brutal to acknowledge and accept is that our outcomes are not always guaranteed by how much effort we invest. When deciding if something is worth our investment, we do our best to ensure we make the most informed decisions, weighing the pros and cons, but we also have to prepare ourselves for the real possibility we could lose it all. If you're like me, you thought, I can analyze my way out of this. I'm not going to accept that my investment did not pay off in the way that I anticipated. So I need to replay the situation constantly because if I dissect it enough, somewhere along the way, I'm going to find a solution. At that juncture, the concern shouldn't be, why isn't this working out? But why am I acting as if it might? I'm not saying we shouldn't persevere when met with adversity, but we're talking about things you know are finished and there's no changing that. What does get over it even mean here? It doesn't mean you have to suppress or ignore how you feel. I'm a huge proponent of having a mourning period. But sooner or later, you need to face some tough facts. The life you once had or envisioned is no longer a possibility. So now all of the passion, love, and energy you invested into your dream needs to be redirected elsewhere. For the sake of your heart and mind, you have got to stop replaying the fantasy of what you thought your future would be and stop berating yourself or others for things that cannot be changed. That boyfriend you had for 6 months and you're still going on about him and keeping tabs on him 12 plus months, Post breakup, he's on a trip with friends, posting pictures. You're screenshotting, zooming in to scrutinize every detail, and privately being a hater to just about anyone who will listen. Do your friends, coworkers, family members a favor and let it go. The athlete. When I was 19, I got injured. I was on track to go pro. You're not telling the story of how it greatly shaped who you are today because you learned so much from a heartbreaking experience. No, you've made droning on and blaming anything you possibly can on not going pro your entire personality. You are 38 years old now. We are past the point of tragic backstory. It is now an identity you refuse to modernize. Spending time rerunning the scenario, rewriting, editing conversations that have already been finalized, and visualizing different outcomes that are out of the realm of possibility does not give you the chance to heal and move on. You have to pick yourself up, even when you want to stay down, because there are real consequences to not doing the hard thing and figuring out what's next. What I mean by that is, remaining in a miserable state of mind creates animosity and bitterness in one's heart. You might think it doesn't leak into different areas of your life, but it does. You're more guarded, less optimistic. Your reactions to certain situations are heavily impacted by the hurt you've yet to resolve. And you have this ongoing side-by-side comparison of where you were versus where you are now. And the current version always feels disappointing, which negatively affects how you see yourself. You can't be present for others the way they need you to be. Not because you're a cold, heartless person, but because you're consumed by something that's not even happening anymore. Clinging to a former existence doesn't just influence the relationship with yourself and those around you. It shows up in how you move through life and the decisions you make. One day you could look up and years have passed by while you're stuck in an identity that isn't an accurate representation. Different opportunities may have come your way that you couldn't even recognize as valuable or helpful for starting a new chapter. Or you may have ignored them altogether because you were preoccupied with the past. It's okay to think, this sucks, and I'm going to keep going. Keep going will look different to every person. It could be, I'm gonna get out of bed tomorrow morning. I'm gonna start taking better care of myself. Or I'm not going to spend any more time replaying what once was. If needed, put a moratorium on anything you know will make you spiral. Social media, rereading old text messages, maybe even certain people. Feelings of emotional attachment, heartbreak, disappointment could still arise. Normal. But that doesn't also mean you can't push forward. You don't need to figure out all of the answers right away, but each day there should be small steps to figure out who you currently are. Because in the long run, holding on to something that's no longer possible, whether a goal, a plan, a relationship, stops being a commitment. Instead, it turns into a denial of reality. That's all for now. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe on YouTube. Leave a 5-star rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Versions of Ourselves Pod, and I'll talk to you later.